They said hospitals were where hope lived, where light never went out, where help would always come. But the first thing the outbreak taught us was that hope can rot faster than flesh. When the infection began, people ran towards hospitals, not away from them. Every headline, every emergency broadcast repeated the same command: seek medical attention immediately. But no one questioned what would happen when thousands followed that same order at the same time. By the end of the first night, hospital parking lots looked like refugee camps. Ambulances kept arriving long after the doctors had stopped coming out. The air reeked of disinfectant, blood, and something else, something no one could name. Inside, the power flickered as backup generators failed one by one. The sound of heart monitors became a countdown, not a comfort. People believed the hospital walls would keep them safe. They did not realize those walls were not built to hold people in. They were built to keep the sick contained. The system worked until the system became the threat. One nurse said she knew the exact moment the hospital died. It was when the loudspeakers started repeating a new announcement: containment breach. All staff remain at your station. Do not evacuate, but no one listened. Doctors locked supply rooms. Patients barricaded doors. Families screamed in stairwells trying to reach their loved ones. No one could tell who was infected anymore. The fever made everyone look the same. Hospitals were designed for control. Clean halls, bright lights, routines that made sense. But once that control was gone, it became something else entirely. A maze of locked doors, endless alarms and bodies that no one dared to touch. And by morning, the safest place in the city had become the deadliest. What if the very people trained to save you were the first to fall? The first infected did not break in. They were admitted. Long before anyone said the word outbreak, hospitals were already filling up with cases of what doctors called mysterious fevers. Patients came in with shaking hands, pale eyes, and whispers that something inside them felt wrong. Most of them never left those rooms again. Doctors believed they were saving lives. They hooked the patients up to IVs, took blood samples, ran tests. But the truth was cruel. They were not treating the infected. They were feeding the infection. Every drip, every needle, every shared touch passed it from bed to bed like a silent secret. One nurse later said the first time she noticed something was off was not from the patients. It was from the air. She said the oxygen smelled sweet, metallic, like something burning under her skin. Moments later, one of the patients she was monitoring flatlined, but his body did not go still. He convulsed, hard enough to break the restraints. The nurse thought it was a seizure, until he sat up. Within minutes, chaos took over the ward. A doctor ran to help, and was bitten before he could even speak. Another nurse tried to close the door, but slipped on blood pooling across the floor. The alarms blared, but no one knew what to do. There was no protocol for this. In those few minutes, a single patient became dozens. The infection traveled through the air vents, through contact, through fear itself. Panic filled the corridors faster than the infected could. People screamed for help, but there was no help left to give. By the time authorities realized what was happening, it was already too late. Ambulances were still bringing in new patients, and every one of them became a carrier. The hospital that was meant to cure had turned into the engine of the apocalypse. The outbreak did not start outside. It started on the operating table. When the healers became the hunted, the real infection began. Every breath inside that building was borrowed. People thought the infection spread through blood, through bites, but it was the air that killed them first. Hospitals are built to breathe. The same air that carries oxygen to every patient's lungs also travels through hundreds of hidden vents, corridors, and steel ducts. It recycles, cleans, and returns. That is what keeps patients alive during surgery. That is also what made sure no one inside could ever leave clean again. When the first quarantine wings were sealed, staff believed they were containing the infection. They did not realize the air conditioning system linked every room together like veins in a body. Every cough, every scream, every final exhale was being drawn in, filtered and released somewhere else. The filters were never designed to stop something that could move like this, microscopic, alive, and hungry. One by one, the isolation rooms became incubation chambers. Nurses wore masks until their skin blistered, yet some still fell sick within hours. The hospital director ordered a full lockdown. Air vents were sealed with duct tape. Windows were nailed shut. But the building itself fought back. Pressure built inside until the vents burst open, releasing what they had trapped. Doctors in hazmat suits walked the halls, thinking they were protected. Their suits hissed softly with every breath, but what they did not know was that the same air was being cycled through their filters, the same poisoned oxygen being shared again and again. One technician tried shutting down the central ventilation unit, but it was buried in the basement, already flooded, humming like a living thing. The infection did not just live in people anymore, it lived in the air. By the second night, the hospital was breathing on its own. The air vents hummed with something no one could turn off. When the power failed, the darkness finally showed what had been breathing beside them. The sounds that once brought comfort began to feel like traps. The rhythmic beep of heart monitors, once a sign of life, now counted down to infection. Every sound had changed meaning. An ambulance siren used to mean help was arriving. Now it meant the infected had found a new direction to follow. Inside the hospital, alarms blared, machines screamed warnings no one could fix. Panic echoed through hallways that used to carry laughter, soft footsteps, prayers. Every sound became an invitation, a signal that something still moved, still lived. And the infection loved the sound of life. Doctors stopped calling for help on the intercoms. Nurses ripped monitors from walls just to stop the noise. Silence became sacred. It was the only thing that didn't draw attention. Silence was survival. Noise was a death sentence. By the final night, only one room still made noise, and the morgue. Its cold machines hummed quietly, steady, patient. The only sound left in the hospital was the sound of what they'd already lost. In the end, the loudest room was the morgue. It did not start with screams. It started with doubt. When the doctors stopped believing in a cure, everyone else stopped living. They tried to hold meetings to stay calm, but the arguments grew louder than the alarms. Who deserved medicine? Who got a bed? Who got left in the hallway to die quietly? Fear made strangers out of healers. One nurse locked herself in the storage room with the last oxygen tanks. Another broke into the pharmacy and never came back out. And somewhere between the crying and the coughing, someone turned the key, locking entire wards from the inside. The medical oath didn't matter anymore. No one was trying to save lives. They were trying to keep theirs. Doctors stopped touching their patients, stopped looking them in the eyes, stopped answering when they begged through the glass. By then, the infection did not need to move through blood. It moved through fear, faster, hungrier, unstoppable. The infection spread faster through fear than through blood. When the lights died, the building remembered it was a tomb. It happened without warning. One sharp click, then silence. The hum of machines faded, the monitors dimmed, and the endless hospital glow finally went black. For the first time in weeks, people could hear their own breathing. And somewhere beneath it, other breaths answered back. Emergency lights sputtered on, bleeding everything in red. Hallways pulsed like open wounds. Every shadow looked alive. Every doorway looked hungry. The elevators froze mid-floor. People banged from the inside, begging to be pulled out. But no one moved. Because now no one trusted the sound of another human voice. Then came the flicker of phone flashlights, small trembling circles of white cutting through the dark. Each light caught a face, pale, shaking, unsure if it was still human. The eyes that looked back weren't always the same. Someone whispered, "Keep the lights off." They follow the light. No one questioned it. No one wanted to know who said it, because deep down they already understood the dark was safer. But no one wanted to admit why. The last ambulance siren never came back. For days they waited by the windows. Doctors, patients, even the infected ones who still had enough mind left to hope. Every sound outside made hearts race. Every silence after made them die a little more. The military had promised evacuation, but then the radios turned to static. The helicopters never circled again. And the roads. They were not roads anymore. They were rivers of metal and bodies. Cars piled into each other, hands frozen on steering wheels. Faces still turned toward the hospital that never saved them. The staff tried sending flares, nothing. They tried calling the next city. No signal. Eventually the generators began to fail one by one, like hearts giving up. That's when they stopped saying, "Help is coming." They started saying, "Stay quiet," because those who went outside did not come back. And those who stayed inside began to understand something worse. They were not waiting for rescue anymore. They tried to save humanity. They only made the infection smarter. Deep beneath the main wards, behind steel doors labeled biohazard containment, a handful of doctors refused to give up. They believed they could reverse it, that if they studied the infected closely enough, they might find a cure. So they began the trials: sedatives, antibiotics, electric shocks. Every test made the infection react differently, faster. It began adapting, resisting anesthesia, repairing burned tissue, learning. At first it was small things: eyes tracking movement even after brain death, muscles tightening when someone whispered near them. Then came the screams, not from pain, but from something imitating it. The doctors thought they were studying the virus, but the virus was studying them. Every injection, every restraint, every note scribbled on a clipboard became another lesson in how to survive human attempts to destroy it. When the observation glass finally cracked from the inside, no one was surprised. Only silent, because they all knew what had just happened. The cure they were making had started learning. What if the virus learned what pain feels like? They came for treatment. They got trapped inside the diagnosis. At first the hallways echoed with crying, parents calling out names, nurses promising everything would be fine. But as hours turned into days, voices grew quieter. Hope began to sound like noise. Families were separated by plastic curtains that no longer mattered. Children sat alone in wheelchairs, waiting for parents who would never come back from the ICU. The lucky ones were sedated. The unlucky ones stayed awake long enough to watch everyone they loved disappear behind locked doors. Doctors, once symbols of salvation, turned into ghosts, walking the corridors with empty syringes and trembling hands. Some stopped treating altogether and began writing apologies on the walls. Messages like "I tried and forgive me" marked the rooms more than blood ever did. They did not fear death anymore. They feared becoming one of them. And when supplies finally ran out, there was no heroism left, just mercy. And even that became complicated. Because in the end, mercy was not a cure, not a prayer. It was a syringe with no label. Behind one door was freedom. Behind the other, the sound stopped. The narrator reached the end of the corridor, walls trembling, alarms dying one by one. Only 2 other survivors remained, a nurse and a boy no older than 12. Both looked at him as if he had the answers. He did not. Every hallway behind them was filled with things that used to be people. Their footsteps echoed over the beeping that refused to die. One last machine trying to prove someone was still alive. Then they saw it. 2 doors. One marked exit, the other sealed with metal locks and warning signs, humming faintly as if something behind it was still breathing. The nurse whispered, "That's the isolation chamber." The first patient was taken there. The boy said nothing, only stared when, because from behind the sealed door came a voice, familiar, calm, calling the narrator's name. It was impossible. Everyone who knew his name was dead. He stood frozen between the 2 doors, freedom on one side, the truth on the other. His hand trembled on the handle. The nurse begged him not to. But curiosity in the apocalypse is just another kind of infection. He turned the lock. The sound inside stopped instantly. For a moment there was peace. Then, from the darkness beyond the door, came something no human throat could make, a scream that sounded exactly like his own voice. And the world went silent again. If you are hearing this, the hospital is not empty. The voice crackles through a recorder half buried under dust and dried blood. Static crawls between his words like something alive. Each sentence sounds rehearsed, as if he has said this hundreds of times before. Not for others, but to remind himself that he still exists. The tone is calm, too calm, the kind that only comes when fear has already burned itself out. He says he has sealed the lower floors, that the infection has changed. It no longer needs blood. It moves through sound, through vibrations in the walls, the hum of lights, the trembling in a voice. It listens, he says. It remembers. He explains that at first they thought it was airborne. Masks, filters, plastic sheets, nothing worked. People who whispered still vanished. People who screamed never finished their screams. And then he understood. It was not the air that carried it. It was the noise. Every echo became a bridge, Every hallway that rang with panic became a feeding ground. I learned too late, he admits, voice cracking under static. Every sound is a map, every heartbeat a signal. He pauses for a long time. Only faint humming can be heard, maybe from the building itself, or maybe from what still moves inside it. He describes walking alone through the halls, stepping only where the tiles were already cracked, so they would not squeak. He removed his shoes, stopped breathing through his nose, learned to cry without sound. The quieter I became, he whispers, the longer I stayed human. Then comes a low, distant noise, something scraping against metal. The recorder trembles in his hand, but he continues speaking. I thought silence was emptiness, he says, but silence is the only wall it cannot cross. He begs whoever finds the tape to destroy everything that makes a sound. The speakers, the intercoms, the phones, even the alarms. Do not talk, do not cry, do not pray out loud, he says, voice shaking. It listens. It always listens. The static grows heavier now, swallowing his words one by one until only fragments remain. If you hear breathing, do not. Then the tape cuts. For a moment there is only silence. Then a faint click. The tape keeps running. A low exhale seeps through the static. Slow, wet, rhythmic. Not from the man who spoke, but from something standing just outside the microphone's range. The breathing grows louder, closer, almost curious. And then the sound stops. The tape keeps spinning, recording nothing but the heavy pulse of empty air. But if you listen long enough, you can still hear it, very faintly, breathing in the dark. Hospitals were built to save life, but in the end they only preserved death. The voice returns, calm, broken, almost accepting. You can hear the weight of realization in every pause, every breath. He speaks of how people trusted the walls more than their instincts, how the bright lights, white coats, and polished floors made them believe they were safe, even as the infection whispered through the vents above them. Faith in the system killed more than the outbreak ever could, because people waited for help that was never coming. They followed orders that led them into sealed rooms. They believed in protocol while the world outside was already learning how to survive without one. Outside, those who ran, who hid, who stayed quiet, they adapted. Inside, those who believed, they became part of the cure that never worked. It was never the blood that doomed us, the narrator says softly. It was belief. Belief that someone else would save us. Belief that the doors were meant to keep danger out, not keep us in. He walks through the empty corridor one last time. The lights flicker, illuminating empty wheelchairs, dried footprints, and walls covered in silent apologies. And as he reaches the exit, the camera tilts toward the hallway, lined with shadows that never move. His voice fades into a whisper. Maybe the dead never left the hospital. Maybe we did.